Good morning. Glad everyone's here this morning. I see at least some of the Sweglers are back. I didn't think to ask Shannon, is Jason back as well?
He's at Detroit Airport. He's going to Ottawa.
So he is home from Texas, but he is heading back to Ottawa. Okay. Is there any prayer requests this morning? Yes, Tom.
Talked to John Vincent yesterday, and I guess Christina's having some issues, and they're thinking it might be gallbladder.
Okay. Absolutely. If anybody didn't hear, Christina Vincent is having a couple of issues. They're thinking it's gallbladder issues, but they're not sure yet completely. But they're going to be getting that checked out, so we want to remember Christina Vincent. Yes. Okay. So you're here for one more day. Good. So let's remember Jason is flight out tomorrow. Anything else? Let's begin with prayer. Father in heaven, we're grateful for this morning you've seen fit to give us. We thank you for this time that we can study your word. Father, let us learn what you have to say through us through the book of Daniel, that we can become better and stronger servants for you and be able to express the gospel more readily to those we come in contact with. Father, we're mindful of Christine and some of the health issues she's going through. We ask that the doctors will be able to figure out exactly what's going on with her and get her health restored. Father, we're thankful for the time that Jason's head up here and be with him. He's going to be heading back tomorrow. And be with Jason Swegler as he's heading out to Ottawa. Give these gentlemen both safe flights to where they're going. In Christ's name, amen. Had to make a couple notes. Sorry about that. Last week we were almost done with Daniel 11:28, but a question was posed at the end of class. Terry, do you want to say that question again?
Can't remember.
Okay, then we're moving on. You wanted to know my thoughts about, in verse 28 in the middle of it, what or who the Holy Covenant was.
Yes, that was it.
That was it. Okay. If I would have known you would have forgot, we would have just blew right by it. For those who are visiting, those who might be watching online for the first or second time, we're going through the book of Daniel. We're in chapter 11 right now. And 11 is an angel talking to Daniel all about prophecy, things that are going to happen after this time with Daniel. And at this point in Daniel's life, he is nearing the end of his life. He's in his mid-80s. He don't know it, but we know through history that he's only got 1 or 2 years left, and Daniel's going to pass on. And what the angel is telling here is what's going to be happening afterwards. He's not saying, Daniel, you're going to die and this is going to happen, but here's what's going to happen in the future. And when I mean future, we're talking about, we know through history, 200 years later, 300 years later, 400 years later, all these things are going to be happening. And we can't find any of this in the Bible, but we can read it through other records of documentation, specifically the Maccabees, which really tells us a lot of this information. So when we read through Daniel, what we're going through here in all of chapter 11, it's all prophecy that Daniel's being told, but we're able to thoroughly understand it by reading through history. So we're getting a prophecy lesson and a history lesson all in one. So if some of this sounds, why we're going through so much history, I believe it's for us to get a better understanding of exactly what the angel's talking to Daniel about here in Daniel 11. So for those just joining in on that's why we're looking at this in two different points of views, reading it through what the Bible says prophecy-wise, but digging in a little deeper historical-wise. And then Terry posed this question last week, who did I think this Holy Covenant was, talking in Daniel 11, verse 28, about what's going on here. My first thing was, okay, I'm going to dig a little deeper. I had a couple lines of notes, but thanks to Terry, we got 2 more pages to go on what this covenant is. But to figure this out my first thing is, how can I explain this? What's a covenant? If we want to figure out what Antiochus his heart is going to be set against the Holy Covenant. Do we take it literally as a covenant of like a binding agreement between two people? Or is this covenant representation of something, of a place, of a person, of a thing? How do we determine that? And I think if we look at it figuratively, is it a person or is it a thing, I think we can figure out what it is. And then if we look at it historically and some of the things that we see through the Maccabees, the historical records, and if we look at another place in the Bible, in the New Testament, I think we can get a better picture of it. So we know this part of the story is about Antiochus V. He's the one that's going to be set against the Holy Covenant. He had recently made an agreement with Ptolemy, the guy that he was fighting with in the south. And I don't believe it's Ptolemy, because when those two sat at the same table making this agreement, neither of them had any indication they were going to keep this agreement. And the covenant, specifically when they're saying a holy covenant, is something that two people are going to put their heart and dedication into if it is an agreement that they're going to try to make this binding, they're going to try to make this stick, they're going to try to make this work. And we see in the Old Testament and in the New Testament that if you look at it as a covenant, as an agreement, there's often things that accompany it. There's certain ceremonies that might go with it. There's oaths and obligations that go with a true type covenant between people. Antiochus and Ptolemy did not have that. So I don't think Antiochus here, his heart is going to be set against the Holy Covenant. That Holy Covenant, I don't believe it is Ptolemy the sixth, I believe is what person is at this time. So I'm ruling him out. And Terry, I didn't want to give you just a straight answer. I want to try to eliminate people, so if somebody's saying, well, why isn't it this guy or why isn't it that? I'm trying to rule some of these things out. Is this Holy Covenant a place? I mean, it would make sense it might be Jerusalem or the temple. But you really can't make a type of agreement with a place like that. But we do know that Antiochus, when he went through Jerusalem this last time, he raided the temple. He took all the valuables out of it. So if it was some type of relationship agreement that he had with the temple, that's not it, because he was completely against some of the things that the Jews were doing. So it couldn't be any type of agreement he had with the temple, which he didn't have an agreement with them, but he was raiding against it. Was he dead set against the temple and thing? Possibility, because it says he was set against the Holy Covenant. He was against, not necessarily the temple, some of the things in it, some of the people, but he raided the temple, not for what the people did in there. He raided it for the belongings. He raided it for its value. So I don't think he was set against the temple. He just raided the temple to take the things out of it to put fortune in his pocket. So I'm ruling out, me personally, is ruling out Jerusalem and the temple, because we also know he killed thousands of Jews in Jerusalem. If anybody's got any comment at this time, please speak up and say, well, what about this in that situation? Does he got something against Jews or God? Well, I don't think he's got any type of holy covenant with Jews or God, because he's killing the Jews. He doesn't like God. He's doing things that God doesn't agree with. So I don't think it's those people. I don't think it's God or the Jews themselves. But what I do think it is, and this is hopefully will answer Terry's question, I think it's the covenant that God has with the Jews. I think that's what's getting Antiochus so upset and so irritated, because the Jews, with their relationship with God, with the covenant that God made with the Jews, the Jewish people became different, distinct from everybody else. They had this unique relationship with this almighty, all-powerful God that has shown his power throughout history previously in the Old Testament. And the Jewish people had certain religious things that they went on. They had certain laws that they did. They had certain ordinances. And all these things made them different from everybody else. It made them different from all the Greeks. It made them different from all the Syrians. It made them different from the Egyptians. These countries, the Syrians and the Egyptians, that were always constantly fighting against each other. And we know Antiochus was over Syria, then we know he eventually conquered part of Egypt. And so the Jewish people were not taking the mindset, the laws, the religions, the worshiping of idols that Antiochus was for, that he was accustomed to, that he instituted some of these things. So the Jewish people, with their relationship, with their covenant with God, they're basically completely against what Antiochus was. And I think for some of these reasons, with the Jewish people having this special relationship with God being different, nations hated them. We've seen that throughout history. And more importantly, in this instance, Antiochus hated them because they weren't abiding by what he was instituting. They weren't doing what he was wanting done religiously. They were still wanting to make their sacrifices. They were still being faithful to God over being faithful and doing what Antiochus IV himself wanted. Going into the New Testament, whoops, not that far. In Hebrews 9, it talks about, now even the first covenant, the one that God made back in the Old Testament, had regulations of divine worship and earthly sanctuary. And to me, the earthly sanctuary here, is, if we read further on in Hebrews 9, is referring to the temple. I believe in Daniel chapter 11, verse 28, that Antiochus' heart will be set against the holy covenant as Antiochus being set against the covenant that God made with the Jewish people in the Old Testament. That's my opinion, my version. What's your...
I completely agree with you.
That was easy. Any other comments on this? I mean, I don't know what you were looking for when you asked that comment, that question of just who I thought it was, or if you wanted more detail on it.
So, I was looking for, because here in 48 it says Holy Covenant.
Right.
Verse 30 it says it twice. But then 31 is one of, you're going to get to this, but it's one of the most important verses in all of Daniel 11, where it talks about what Antiochus does in Jerusalem.
Right.
So you're framing this as being Antiochus and how he treats the Jews. And then it makes sense to say that the Holy Covenant is Antiochus IV's dislike of the agreement that God had with the Jews.
It's building up to a pinnacle, so to speak, that his disdain for the Jews, the people themselves. Now it's going his disdain for God, then it's going to his disdain for God's agreement with the Jewish people. And we see that building up, and the more and more that Antiochus' heart is hardened, and his grudge, his hate, I'll use the word hate to the Jewish people, he becomes more and more vicious, more and more vile to what he does to the Jews and to places that are extremely holy to the Jewish people, as Terry enlightened, that we will see what he does into the temple and later on in verse 30-31. So all of that to get to answer a simple question, who do I think the Holy Covenant is? I think the Holy Covenant is the agreement between God and his people. Versus, some people and some commentators say, no, it's between, Antiochus and the temple. Well, no, that's not the case, because he didn't value the temple for anything like that. But by the words Holy Covenant here is specifying something specific and something that is truly holy and something divine, I believe. And I tried to look up the Hebrew word for covenant, and it come berith, and I couldn't dig and find enough that is there a masculine and feminine version, does it mean one thing in one place, one thing in another? And I went through when it said it in Daniel 9, and then a couple places here in Daniel 11, and other places in the Bible, it was the same format, the same verbiage, the same writing of the Hebrew word for covenant, so I couldn't find a complete distinction. And I'm nowhere near adverse on Hebrew words, but I'm sure if I dug a little deeper, there is some distinction between these, but I couldn't find it in some of these words the Hebrew word for covenant here in Daniel. Any questions on this? Anybody saying, I kind of agree with you, but what about this? Moving on then. Are you satisfied with the answer? Okay. Going on to verses 29 through 35. And I said when we started Daniel 11, remember, Daniel 11, the angel is the one that's talking to Daniel this whole time. And in chapter 10, Daniel's the one that saw this person that looked like a man as the angel. And the angel, this whole time is Daniel, here's what's going to be happening. And eventually there's going to be coming an end to all this suffering for the Jewish people. And that's one thing that Daniel was praying for before. When is this going to end? When are your people, God, going to get some relief? The angel is telling Daniel, here's what's going to happen, and there is going to be some relief at the end. Daniel 11, 29 through 35. At the appointed time he will return and come into the south, but this time it will not turn out the way it did before. For ships of Kittim will come against him, therefore he will be disheartened, and will return and become enraged at the holy covenant and take action. There's that holy covenant again. For he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with regular sacrifice. And they will set up the abomination of desolation. By smooth words he will turn the godlessness those who acted wickedly toward the covenant. But the people who know their God will display strength and take action. Those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many, yet they will fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity, by plunder for many days. Now when they fall, they will be granted little help, and many will join with them in hypocrisy. Some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end, because it is still to come at the appointed time. What's interesting here, in verse 29, it starts out, at the appointed time he will return. At the appointed time is that he will return is about Antiochus. And the appointed time is on God's timetable, not Antiochus' timetable. And then when we get all the way down to verse 35, it's about talking about refining and purging and making them pure at the end of time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. So this section here, we're talking about certain timetable, and the appointed time is in God's timetable, not man's. It's not Antiochus setting this timetable. It's not the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Jewish people setting this timetable. It's God. When all things are set and all things are ready, these things are going to happen. And remember, this whole time period through all of Daniel, God's people, the Jewish people, are in what? They're in captivity. Why are they in captivity? They're being punished. Why are they being punished? Because they weren't faithful to God. So I don't want to say they're being taught a lesson, but God is teaching them a lesson that I told you you're to obey me. And if you don't obey me, bad things happen. Here's the bad things. But God also doesn't allow bad things to happen forever. There's going to be an end to this for the Jewish people. There's going to be an end for the suffering, this learning lesson that they're going through. And that's one thing that the angel is telling Daniel in this, is it's going to stop at some point. And I'm going to keep telling you more and more until the message I have is done. So verse 25 or 29, it says, I mentioned that the angel is talking about the appointed time, that it's on God's timetable that's coming. And who's going to be the one that's going to be coming? It's Antiochus again. He's going to come into the south. Remember, Antiochus is the king of the north, king of Syria. He's going to come back through, go down through Jerusalem. We saw that little passage before on the map, then go into to Egypt. But at the end of verse 29, it says, but this last time, meaning this next time that he's going to go into battle, it will not turn out the way it did before. The last time Antiochus went into Egypt, what happened? He was victorious. He took basically all of Egypt except Alexandria, where they themselves kind of resisted him, and they says, we're no longer pushing for Ptolemy, I think it's the 6th, because he's not doing anything to help defend us. We're taking his brother to be our king. So basically all of Egypt now is for Antiochus, the king of Syria, the king of the north, other than this one little city, Alexandria, that says, we put up enough resistance, he's not taking us, we're putting a new king and instituting him. But what we're talking about here, and it didn't turn out the way before, Antiochus was victorious taking Egypt. He's not going to be victorious when he comes through this time. That's what the angel's telling Daniel. I'm giving you names of Antiochus and Ptolemy and all that. Daniel has none of this. History is what's telling us these people's names. History is saying is specifically Antiochus IV, is specifically Ptolemy VI, going through these certain areas. And that's one reason that it's important for us to know the history of what's going on here. But we know that through history, it didn't turn out well for Antiochus coming through the second time into Egypt. Antiochus is going to war. I mean, he did it for many, many reasons. A lot of it was to get more fame, to get more fortune, to become more powerful. But this time, he decided to come from Syria again. Remember, last time when he left Egypt, he went through Jerusalem and he raided the temple, went back home. So now he's coming back through to Egypt to fight again. And it's because he heard rumor that Ptolemy VI, who he fought against mostly in Egypt, that he kind of put back into power as a puppet into Egypt, that him and his brother Ptolemy the seventh, the guy in Alexandria, reconciled. So he's hearing that these two kings, that one was for me, one was my puppet, and one was in this little town of Alexandria that was resisting me, they're on good terms again. They've reconciled. So he's thinking, are they going to form an alliance? Are they going to come against me? Are they planning and scheming to do battle with me? He didn't know. And that's one of the reasons he's coming back down to the south, say, let's end this. Let's squelch this little agreement these people got going on. So Antiochus is heading down to Egypt. He troops through Jerusalem. And for about 40 days, most of the battle took place in Memphis, where Ptolemy VI was the puppet king. And that's where most of the battles took place. Yes, it took place in more of the surrounding areas, but Antiochus was focused on Memphis, where Ptolemy VI was king. He took horsemen clothed in garments with golden weave, very flashy. There were armors fully armed with lances and swords. There were squadrons of cavalry that were armed with spears, and there were archers, thousands of archers with their arrows, all attacking this one area. And as he marched through Egypt, many of the people of Memphis quickly submitted to him. Some did not, areas around did not. That's why this battle took 40 days. If we look at this map on the right side, you see the hash marks. That's the Jerusalem area. That's where Antiochus came down, and we can see Memphis roughly in the middle of the map. That's where most of this battle took place for approximately 40 days. A lot of the people submitted quickly to him in Memphis. This is where Ptolemy VI was, and that purple going down to the bottom where it says Ptolemaic Kingdom, that's Egypt. And that's the area that he had already conquered, but he's saying he's feeling that something else is going on because the two brothers he heard reconciled, the one in Memphis and the one a little further north on the water's edge, Alexandria. And so he's trying to squelch this. So Antiochus is in Memphis doing this battle with this big army, and he's making headway here. He's taking it over. So after he conquers Memphis and he kind of gets things in line there, he's going to head to Alexandria, where the Alexandrians put Ptolemy the seventh in charge. He was chosen by the people of Alexandria, and this is the guy that now Antiochus is going after. And in verse 30, we see, for the ships of Kittim will come against him. So somebody else is coming into play here. Somebody else is going to battle against Antiochus. When it says come against him, they're coming against Antiochus. And if we see Cyprus up there toward the very top, Kittim was another name for Cyprus. So that's where these ships are coming from. And we think, man, how did it take so long? Remember, they didn't have the internet. They didn't have no way to determine how things are going. People are watching other people. Countries are watching other countries. So as this large army is coming from Syria in the purple section, or the pink or purple, the Seleucid kingdom, you got this massive army coming through. It's going to be obvious to other countries, other nations, that something's going to happen as they're marching down toward Jerusalem. And it's no news that Antiochus and Egypt have been fighting. So as they're coming down, a naval fleet is coming out of Cyprus, and it's heading to the south. And one of the more popular areas to go is to the Nile River area. And I think this last one showed it a little better. The Nile Delta, those are areas where the Nile River came out. And so it's obvious if somebody wants to protect or do battle, they're going to bring their naval fleet down into that area. I do not know if the people of Kittim knew that Antiochus was going to battle in Alexandria or not, but as history tells us, the naval fleet did set up some ships at the mouth of the Nile River at Alexandria. So, excuse me. Cyprus wasn't extremely large, powerful nations by themselves. They had help. They were in the good favors of Rome, who is now an empire that is building and getting stronger and stronger. And in this instance, the ships that did come from Kittim, that did come from Cyprus, was the Roman army, the Roman naval fleet that was sent down. So Rome is sticking their nose into the battle here, which is going on. And so when Antiochus is getting down there, I went off. We'll go back to that one. The Roman Navy positioned itself at the mouth of the Nile River, right there by Alexandria. So it's got all these naval fleets there in case Antiochus had a naval fleet coming through, which he didn't. But they're positioned there. They can be in that area, and they can have the troops come off and into the land as Antiochus' army is coming through on land. So there's plenty of people there. It's the Roman army there, and Antiochus is coming to it. When Antiochus' military got from Memphis up to Alexandria, he was met by a Roman ambassador, Gaius Populus Lianus, about 4 miles south of Alexandria. So this Roman ambassador was waiting for Antiochus to come up. And history was telling us, I'm not making this up, that through the Maccabees and other historical records that have been documented of what's happening here, that this ambassador met him, and he handed a decree to Antiochus from the Roman Senate, and it ordered him to leave Egypt or face war with Rome. This is somebody he hasn't battled with yet. And remember, Greek was a large empire. It got divided up into 4 sections. It became smaller, and then now Antiochus is building up one of those sections. But Rome this whole time has been in the background, building their empire, becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. They're making a name for themselves. The naval fleet is there, and they're being told by, Rome, leave, or you're going to start battling us now. You're not going to be battling Alexandria. You're not going to be battling this little city. You're going to be battling us. And the Roman military at this point is starting to become a force and starting to make a name for themselves. So we see Rome intervening right now in the Egyptian affairs and the Ptolemy group affairs, fighting against the Seleucid affairs, which is Antiochus' team. And Antiochus said, he gets this decree, he says, okay, let me talk to my advisors before I leave, which makes sense. Do I really want to leave? Are you asking or? Okay. The Roman ambassador at that point when Antiochus said, let me talk to his advisors. And I can see this because some of the stories we see about Jesus writing in the sand. The Roman ambassador drew a circle around Antiochus IV, standing right there, and then he told him, make up your mind before you leave that circle. You want to think about it? Stand right there and think. I mean, that's impressive. And that's telling me the forces behind what this ambassador from Rome had behind him and what he was told, that if this man Antiochus proceeds any further, you are to battle him. And for him to draw the circle around Antioch and say, think about it before you step out of that circle, was quite impressive. So Rome was ready to do war against the king of the north, against Antiochus IV there. And needless to say, Antiochus made up his mind, and he did retreat. But can you imagine the humiliation at that point? I don't know who was around. I don't know if it was just him. None of the records say if it was just him and just this Roman ambassador, or if Antiochus had his top advisors with him. More than likely, they were standing behind him with some soldiers, because movies, you see in the movies, 2 people just don't go together. The 2 main people go, and they got their troops or whoever right behind them as they're all talking. More than likely, there's people hearing this conversation. There's people around at a distance seeing a circle drawn around this guy. And for him to say, okay, I'm going to leave, that had to be extremely, extremely humiliating. This guy that did something that his forefathers didn't do, conquered most of Egypt. He had more wealth than all his forefathers did. He had more power than all his forefathers did. He came down and he took Egypt like he did, and he was ready to keep rolling and rolling. Circle was drawn around him, and now he had to leave. Very, very humiliating. And that's one of the things where we read in verse 30 that made him disheartened. He had to walk away with his tail between his legs because he was extremely embarrassed, because this ambassador says, If you don't leave, you're going to be fighting the Romans. And Antiochus did not want to do that. He did not want to fight the Romans. Shortly after Antiochus left, a rumor was going around, because you can imagine rumors fly during battle, and a rumor was circulated that Antiochus himself was dead, that he was killed. And there was this deposed high priest that I talked about once a little bit earlier when Heliodotus, this high priest Jason, he heard that Antiochus was dead. And it's not true. History shows it wasn't true, because Antiochus was alive and well. And this Jason gathered about 1,000 men, and he attacked the city. I couldn't find exactly what city it was. I don't know if it was Alexandria. I don't know if it was Memphis. I don't know if it was up in Syria. So if anybody knows that, I couldn't find what city it was. And I'm getting this from the Maccabee section. When I say section, the Maccabee books, which it's not in the Bible, it's what happened between the Old Testament and New Testament. But I don't find anywhere what city is defined in talking about here. But Jason attacked this particular city, and as the defenders that were on the walls, they were forced back, and the city was being taken over, another deposed high priest, Melanius, he took refuge in this city. He took refuge in the citadel of this city, and he was trying to hide, trying to save his own skin. And Jason, this deposed high priest, he continued and slaughtered thousands of his own fellow citizens. So that tells me wherever he was, the people there, they were kind of under his rule, so to speak, because he was saying, I'm a high priest, when he really wasn't. And so they knew of him, they knew him, but he's slaying his own citizens here. And he was triumphant over them. And one of the things is, if you're triumphant over taking over a city, which is your own people, the people that left, how's that going to make them feel? They're not going to like you very much. Because you're supposed to be their ruler, you're supposed to be over them, you're supposed to be your high priest over them, and yet you're slaying your own people. So, was it a victory? Yes. But it wasn't a victory because of who he was slaying and who he was trying to kill and trying to overcome. As this battle went on, Antiochus IV, who was supposedly rumored dead, heard this. And he thought that Judea was in revolt. When I read this part, it makes me wonder, the city that Jason was trying to capture, is that Judea? Was that in the area of Palestine? I don't know yet. I haven't found that out. But Antiochus the fourth heard of this, and he's thinking there's a revolt going on, and these Jewish people are coming up against me. And this is when he really decided to get rid of the Jewish religion altogether. And the phrase there, to rid the Jewish religion altogether, I read in the Maccabees. And I think it's interesting that it was not to rid the Jewish people. It was to rid the Jewish religion, which kind of goes back to the Holy Covenant that he had such a hate for a couple verses back. It wasn't necessarily the people, is what the people had with their relationship with God, that their religion. And that's what in the Maccabees was saying, he hated their religion. He wanted to extinguish the Jewish religion. And the phrase will return in verse 30, he will return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant. That's the agreement between God and the Jewish people, and take action. He came barreling out. He set out from Egypt and took Jerusalem by storm. So the Jerusalem area is where the general area that this battle has taken place. And Antiochus, he told the soldiers to cut all those down that they come across without mercy. And any of those that took refuge in their house, if they're trying to stay out of battle and they were in their house, to go into their homes and kill those people as well. So Antiochus is furious that this little battle that Jason started, that Antiochus thought was a revolt against him and his authority, he's going around killing all the Jewish people now. Whether they're out on the streets going to battle him, whether they're in their homes seeking safety, he is battling these people. In a period of 3 days, this battle that Antiochus started, 80,000 were killed, 40,000 meeting a violent death, and the same number were sold into slavery. That's how vicious and ruthless Antiochus was against the Jewish people because of their covenant with God, because of their religion. And not being satisfied with all of that, not being satisfied with killing over 80,000 people, Antiochus entered the temple. He was being guided by that other high priest, Melanius, that was a traitor, because remember, he was deposed high priest. He was a traitor to the laws of the land and to his country, but here he's serving as a guide to Antiochus. And if we recall when, a couple weeks ago, when Heliodotus went into the temple and what happened to him when he came back, and when the king said, "You didn't come rob the temple, who would you send?" And he said, "I'd send the people I hate the most, my worst enemy there, because if they survive, they're going to come back beaten and badly hurt." We see Antiochus is entering the temple himself there. So we don't know what's going to happen to him other than because he had so much power, he had the army, he had support of what's going on there. He goes into the temple basically unscathed. Nobody put up resistance against Antiochus when he entered the temple at this point in verse 30. And we see in verse 31 that he's going to desecrate the sanctuary. And this is all talking about what Antiochus is now going to do to the temple. I jumped a little ahead of myself. In the end of verse 30, it says, he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. This is talking about Antiochus when he came back into the area. When he's here now, he's showing preferential treatment. He's not going to kill those people that are showing good things to him. This is talking about Melanius and the people that are supporting Antiochus at this time. That is who it's talking about here. And Melanius is showing preferential treatment to Antiochus. You said, "Here, let me be your guide into the temple. Let me get you in there, and now you can go loot and pillage the temple to your liking." And that is what the end of verse 30 is talking about the people that forsake the Holy Covenant. There were Jewish people that were trying to save their own skins, and there were also Jewish people that thought that Antiochus' way was the best way. So some of them did not stay faithful to God. There were Jewish people that did not stay faithful to God throughout this time in captivity, either when it was back with Nebuchadnezzar, when they were under the Medes and Persians, when they were under the Greeks. Right now, there are Jewish people that aren't staying faithful to God. Some did, some didn't. And verse 30 is talking about those who weren't staying faithful to God at that point. Any questions? A lot of history here. A lot of history in this stuff to catch up. Yes, Terry.
Just one comment about the Romans. These armies in ancient times like this were often not very well trained, not very well organized. They weren't disciplined. And these armies that you're talking about here, they were not. But the Romans were. They were exceptionally well trained. They were exceptionally fed well. They had food. They had everything they needed. And to give you just one tiny example of how this was, it was the Roman Empire, the Roman army that first got the idea of having the shields that would physically link with each other.
Interlock.
Which meant you couldn't get around the shields to fight the people. It was like a wall of metal coming, and they were metal, coming toward you. And what you do is push forwards, people would fall down, they'd push forward, and then the people behind the Romans would kill them, because they were laying on the ground when they walked over. This was an army that anybody with sense knew you don't want to get in a fight with. And that's one
Absolutely.
reason why he was doing great, but then he said, "I gotta get out of town.
You back down.
These people are way beyond my capability to fight." Oh, by the way, Mike got real sick, and that's why he and his wife left. He had to go home.
Okay. So we'll make that announcement. Let's remember Mike. He's not feeling well, so they had to take off. Many times throughout this, the battles, I said, and the elite of this particular nation, the elite from this empire, the Roman standard soldier was better than the elite of these other nations. That's how good they were. And I've seen historical things of what Terry mentioned about I wasn't going to go into how well the Romans were, but how their shields interact. And sometimes when they would come in, there would also be a hole that if somebody's coming in, they'd thrust their javelins or swords through to get the first wave down. Then as they're going, they're killing the people that they're standing over, like Terry was saying. They had it down. They had their training. They had this. They were the best of the best, and that was their standard army. The best of everybody else was their standard army. And the Romans were, like I said, they were up and coming, and they are going to be making a name for themselves, which we see in the New Testament. So we see that happening in the New Testament. Wow. 2 verses. We're going to stop. Unless anybody has any questions. I thought with Ted being gone, I can get through 4, but apparently not. But we're going to start with verse 31 next week, and it talks about what Antiochus does to the temple, and it's to a normal person, like, that ain't too bad, but to the Jewish people, it was horrific. It went against everything that they were believing in, and it just tells you what kind of person Antiochus IV is. Anything before we go? Thanks for being here.